A couple of big by-elections took place on Monday. The one in Winnipeg was won by the NDP, and the one in Montreal, the riding there, was taken by the Bloc Québécois. Now, to chat about this in more detail and what it may mean for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is political columnist with the Toronto Sun, Brian Lilley, joining us once again from the Big Smoke. Now, Brian, Leila Dance of the NDP took the Elmwood-Transcona riding in Manitoba, narrowly beating the Tory candidate Colin Reynolds, and the Verdun riding was taken by Louis-Philippe Sauvé, beating the Liberal candidate Laura Palestini. Now, the Montreal riding was a Liberal stronghold that was former Justice Minister David Lamedte's riding. In your opinion, what should we make out of all of this?
My general take on by-elections is mostly they don't matter at all until they do. And these two by-elections matter a great deal. Like the one in Toronto St. Paul's, where the Conservatives stole it back in June, that's a big deal. That was a riding that it was about 40 years since the Conservatives had won that riding. And then in these two, as you mentioned, the riding of La Salle et Marc Verdun, David Lamedte held it until recently. He was Justin Trudeau's justice minister until Trudeau unceremoniously dropped him, and Lamedte said, "All right, I'm out of here." So a bit of a self-inflicted wound by Trudeau. He lost a cabinet minister, loses the by-election, loses a seat. This is also the riding that Paul Martin, when he was prime minister and finance minister under Jean Chrétien, he represented this area. So for the Liberals to lose it is a big deal. In the last election, they took just over 40% of the popular vote in that riding. They dropped 15 points to 27. Every other party saw their vote increase. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, look how bad the Conservatives did. They only got 11.6%. Well, the last election, they only got 7.45. So that was a big increase for them. Still bad, and I never expect them to do well in this riding. But the Bloc and the NDP were challenging. I was watching the numbers roll in until the wee hours, and it was rolling over like a speedometer every few updates. At various points, the NDP, the Liberals, and the Bloc were all in the lead. In the end, the Bloc comes out victorious. Elmwood-Transcona, that was important not for the Liberals at all. They were not players in this, but for the NDP. Jagmeet Singh, since he ripped up the coalition deal, has been trying to say that, look, I'm the only person that can take on Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. I'm the only one that can stand up to him. He couldn't afford to lose that by-election if that's his messaging. If he had lost, if Colin Reynolds had taken that for the Conservatives, wow, Jagmeet Singh would have no argument going forward. So he won. That's good for him and his party. But part of the reason, talking to New Democrats, part of the reason that they ripped up the agreement when they did is the anger they were hearing at the door in Winnipeg from voters saying, we don't like you. You're too close to the Liberals. By the way, what happened to the Liberal vote in Elmwood-Transcona? It collapsed as well. So it collapsed in Verdun. It collapsed in Elmwood-Transcona. It went from 15% last election to under 5% this election. And it looks like everybody else, whether it was PPC or Greens, everybody went to the Conservatives, not the New Democrats. The New Democrats held where they were last election. The Conservatives jumped up from 28 to 44%.
So, Brian, the Liberals lost the Verdun riding. They lost the Trudeau area riding recently. Do you think Justin Trudeau will finally see the writing on the wall and perhaps step down? Will he receive even more pressure from party members to step aside?
What? I'm sorry. I hear you talking. I can't hear you, Hal. That's kind of what Justin Trudeau is doing. He came out in front of the cameras this morning and talked about, we just need to make sure that people are more engaged and we need to engage with them more. He was essentially saying, we need to talk to Canadians louder and longer. I don't think that is the message Canadians are sending you. Canadians are sending the message that they want change. And that includes him leaving as prime minister. We had the Montreal area MP, Alexandre Mendez, coming out and saying, look, I still like him, but I heard clearly from my constituents, they don't want him as leader anymore. They don't want him as prime minister. He's not getting it. I don't know if you saw this, but there was reporting in the Toronto Star over the weekend. If it wasn't in the Star, I would think this was satire. People were making stuff up to ridicule Trudeau. But it's from a well-connected reporter, lots of insights into the Liberal caucus and cabinet. And Trudeau was playing clips of Rocky and the inspirational speech that Al Pacino gives in the movie Any Given Sunday about coming back. As Pierre Poilievre said on the weekend, Trudeau thinks he's the star of every movie and he's the underdog, the little guy, even though he was born on third base with a silver spoon in his mouth. You know, Trudeau is determined to stick around. He is determined to fight Poilievre, and he will stick it out as long as he can. He was making nice noises about the Bloc and the NDP when the House resumed on Monday, saying he understands them and they want what's right for Canadians, not like those conservatives who don't care about Canadians.
Now, Brian Jagmeet Singh says he's the only leader who can stand between Canadians and conservative cuts. Now, many would argue the biggest cut that Pierre Poilievre is going to make is to the carbon tax, axe the tax. Is Singh Poilievre's biggest competition leading up to 2025?
No, I don't think so. Whether we go this fall, this coming spring, or in October 2025, I don't think so. Jagmeet Singh has not resonated with voters at all. NDP fundraising is weak at best. Their polling puts them below where they've been performing in the last few elections. There are New Democrats and supporters of that party questioning whether he should go. If he had lost that by-election last night, there would be calls for his head today. He had to rip up the agreement to show that he wasn't in Justin Trudeau's pocket to try and save the furniture in a riding that the NDP have won now 11 of the last 12 elections. They've won that riding. So, for the Conservatives to come that close is a threat to the NDP, and they know it. If they hadn't ripped up that confidence in supply agreement, the coalition deal, very well the Conservatives might have taken it because New Democrat supporters might have said, I'm staying home. Now, Jagmeet Singh has to worry about confidence votes and what's he going to do? Will he vote with the government? That's going to be a difficult issue for him to follow. Denouncing them constantly and then voting with them will not look good to these same people who are upset in Winnipeg.
Brian, Liberal House Leader Karina Gould just got back from maternity leave. She showed up in the House of Commons calling Pierre Poilievre a fraudster. Now, where did that come from?
Poilievre, gave a speech to his caucus on Sunday. All the parties have their caucuses meet before the return of Parliament. The New Democrats went to Montreal trying to rally the troops for the by-election there, partly, I think. And of course, the Trudeau cabinet flew to Halifax, and then the whole Liberal caucus went to Nanaimo. They love racking up the carbon footprint. So Poilievre gives this speech to the Conservative caucus Sunday morning in Ottawa, and says the same thing he said to me in the interview I did with him that aired on Sunday. He said, Trudeau's carbon tax will result in a nuclear winter for Canadian industry. And he backs it up. My conversation with him, I put things to him. He backs it up with fact of what's happening. He points to the report from the Canadian Truckers Alliance, the fact that something like cement is going to double in price under the carbon tax because the carbon tax will more than double what it costs to make a ton of cement. So all of these things are there. But he calls it a nuclear winter, says it'll be bad. Based on that, Karina Gould calls him a fraudster. Then she stands up in the House of Commons and bemoans people name calling when they start referring to Mark Carney as carbon tax Carney. Karina Gould is one of the most partisan, lecturing, hectoring MPs going. She does it with a smile. She's very smiley. She seems very pleasant, but she is one of the most partisan MPs going. She's probably going to lose her riding in Burlington, Ontario. Between Toronto and Hamilton. It's a well-to-do suburban area. It flips between Conservatives and Liberals. But yeah, she was, as my mother would say, she's got quite the brass neck, standing there and calling people names and then decrying people calling other people names. It's, and then she says, defends the CBC, saying, well, we've got to protect CBC because of all the misinformation out there. By the way, she lied about every single one of Poilievre's positions, ascribing to him things that he's never said.
Let's talk a little bit more about some of the nicknames. It seems like Gould's not the only one that's taking issue with it. Like you said, carbon tax Carney and the phantom finance minister. Liberals are calling these names what, Trumpian?
Yeah, these nicknames could stick and they could work. They could also turn some people off, especially women voters. Men are much more comfortable with aggressive politics and aggressive posturing than women. And I know some viewers watching might say, oh, why are you being stereotypical? Well, stereotypes do exist for a reason. And the public opinion polling would back that up. So Pierre has to walk a very fine line between being aggressive and doing things like nicknames and not turning off swing voters. Swing voters win every election, right? You know, the parties are trying to win the swing voters so they can win the election. You've got to have those swing voters on side. And women in the suburbs of Toronto and Vancouver, big part of the group that's going to decide the election. Right now, they're on Poilievre's team in droves. It used to be that the Conservatives just had a big gender gap when it came to men. Well, now there's a big gender gap between the number of women supporting the Conservatives and the women supporting the Liberals. The Liberals only have women over the age of 55, mostly who are retired civil servants. That's their basic base now, and it's why they're doing so badly in the polls. Abacus had them down at 22% support nationally, 25% in Ontario. Those numbers are wipeout numbers.
Brian, let's also talk a bit about this dust-up between the Conservatives and the Liberals over satellites and billionaire Elon Musk. What happened there?
Last Friday, Justin Trudeau went to Montreal and he announced $2.14 billion as a loan for Telesat. Now, Telesat was started in 1969 by the federal government, was a crown corporation until the 90s, sold off by the Chrétien Liberals to Bell. Then it was sold off to an American company. And in 2021, they had an IPO. They're a publicly traded company now, and their big shareholders are in New York and Chicago. But, you know, they still have a lot of workers in Canada, and they want to launch low Earth orbit satellites. It's a project called Lightspeed. They've already got 198 of them up in space, and they want to launch more to provide home internet services and business internet services in rural and remote areas. There's also a component, a small part of this, that would be upgrading capabilities for NORAD and NATO. But that's a small part. And the government didn't play that up. They played up, we are giving home internet to rural and remote areas. So Michael Barrett, Conservative MP from just outside Ottawa, he tweeted at Elon Musk, how much would it cost for you to do this using Starlink? And he replied, half that price. Well, the Liberals freaked out and said, oh, look, they'd rather give money to American billionaires, to foreign billionaires. Wait, last time I checked, Elon Musk, Canadian. Used to have a Canadian passport. I understand he doesn't travel on one now, but a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. Oh, unless you're a successful business person in America that has different political views. So that's kind of the dust up. The Liberals initially said, their argument was this is about jobs in Quebec. When they realized that looked bad, they try and switched it to defense. There's an argument to be made for having sovereignty on matters of defense communications, but the majority of the Lightspeed project by Telesat is about home and business internet. When the government gave them $1.4 billion 3 years ago to do this project, which still isn't off the ground properly, they said it would connect 40,000 homes. 40,000 homes. That's it, Hal. Starlink has 400,000 customers in Canada already, and they started after Telesat. And Telesat is going to use Starlink's parent company, SpaceX, also owned by Elon Musk, to launch the rest of their satellites. I want good homegrown jobs in industries in Canada. It's important. But obviously, Telesat is not, building the better mousetrap.
Brian, the public inquiry into foreign interference will not give us the names of the 11 federal candidates who allegedly received funds and assistance from China. What was the reasoning behind this?
They cite privacy. They cite the need to not prosecute people in the court of public opinion. My argument, Hal, is we still need to know more. We've known about this for a couple of years now. We've had a public inquiry, and all Canadians are being told is, no, you don't need to know anything. You just know that we're looking after it. So we don't know the candidates. We don't know the political operatives in the background that were doing this. There's one Chinese diplomat that we didn't even expel. They left of their own volition months after their name was revealed as being part of this. Compare that to the United States. There have been two incidents recently, one involving Chinese interference in the American affairs, one involving Russian interference in American affairs. There are charges in both. The former deputy chief of staff to the governor of New York, two governors. She worked for both Andrew Cuomo and then for Kathy Hochul after Cuomo stepped down, charged with acting as a foreign agent, money laundering, all kinds of other charges. Her husband charged as well. In the Russia case, two employees of Russia Today charged with trying to spread influence, being foreign agents of Russia, money laundering. These people are facing serious criminal prosecution. And in Canada, we're patted on the head and told, no, don't worry about it. Now, I understand that some of the MPs may not even know that they were being targeted by this. Just like in the RT case, there are a number of well-known American conservatives who were in that. But even the Democrat Attorney General, Merrick Garland, said these guys didn't know that this plot was going on underneath them. They were detached from it. That may be the case with the MPs. We still deserve to know who's being targeted, how they're being targeted, who is doing the targeting. Not this, let's just pretend everything's good. And then, of course, the Liberal talking point is, well, Pierre Poilievre could find out if he would just get a security clearance. Well, okay, but then what could he do with it? Absolutely nothing. If he found out that he had a gaggle of his MPs who were actually agents of China and he acted on that, he'd be in violation of the secrecy laws of Canada. The only way for this to have real action is for the government to release the information. Swearing Poilievre to a secrecy clause and then showing him what's going on won't solve anything.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.